Meine Damen und Herren, ich möchte Sie sehr herzlich begrüßen beim Sabine 115. Ja, 115. Geburtstag von Bruno Kreisky. Für uns ist das jede Veranstaltung ist die jeweils wichtigste, aber das ist eine ganz besonders wichtige, kann man so sagen. Es freut mich, dass so viele Gäste heute gekommen sind und ich möchte allen voran unseren Vizekanzler und Vorsitzenden der Sozialdemokratischen Partei Österreichs herzlich willkommen heißen, von dem ich weiß, dass es für ihn terminlich sehr kompliziert war, heute herzukommen. Aber er hat gesagt, es muss sein und jetzt ist es so. Willkommen. Fein, dass du da bist. Ich darf noch die ehemaligen Bundesminister Peter Jankovic und Darabosch begrüßen. Verteidigung und Außen. Ich glaube, ihr wart jeweils im Ressort die letzten Sozialdemokraten. Stimmt das? Ja. Und dann möchte ich glaube, die Herrenbotschafter, es sind keine Damenbotschafter, Herrenbotschafter, herzlich willkommen. Damenbotschafter. Botschafterinnen und Botschafter, sehr herzlich willkommen. Es freut uns einfach, dass Sie alle hier sind. Ich möchte eigentlich nur Ihnen sagen, dass wir uns gemeinsam, und da möchte ich Sie gerne sozusagen als Verbündete an meiner Seite wissen, bei Sabine Kreusenbrunner und ihrem Team bedanken, dass Sie im vergangenen Jahr und bisher auch im heurigen Jahr hier ein ganz tolles Programm gemacht haben, dass wir froh darüber sind, stolz drauf sind und ihr macht es großartig. Danke. Und bevor ich mich hinsetze, möchte ich noch willkommen heißen Corinna Milborn, die dann unser Podium vorstellen wird, die Diskussion moderieren und ich glaube, ich darf das sagen, eine Verbündete ist. Herzlich willkommen. Und jetzt übergebe ich an Sabine Kreusenbrunner, die vermutlich Ihnen sagen wird, dass sie gerne hier arbeitet. Sabine.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ambassadors. We are multilingual here in this Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue, so I continue in English. Also, our panel, of course, will be in English. Yes, indeed, I love to work here, to be here, and there are so many connections with my own personal life to Bruno Kreisky, but also I would also like to echo, first of all, the thanks, my thanks to everyone who is today here in this evening, representing different ministries, different institutions that have been cooperating with us. Thank you also, embassies, ambassadors, as I said, ministries, think tanks, everyone, and of course also people from the media, my former colleagues, still colleagues in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, so and other partners of cooperation. So thank you very much. Due to you, actually, we can have this excellent program, as it was, thank you, as it was mentioned. And we hope to continue that way. I'm here to give you only a very brief insight into why, and probably this is a question we don't even have to answer, why is it that at the 115th birthday of Bruno Kreisky, we put it under the motto of Bruno Kreisky and the Middle East. We have seen, not only in the last year, but over many years, decades, very many challenges. And what we can see is that Bruno Kreisky, in his concept of an active neutrality, has been the one and only foreign minister, so to speak, who had such an interest and also a great network and contact to great politicians, but on countries in the Middle East. I think This will be reflected in today's panel when we look to Egypt and Kreisky's relations to Egypt. It will be, as it was mentioned, Corinna Milborn, thank you very much for the moderation, who will introduce our guests in greater detail. We also look, of course, and ask ourselves very often, since times have changed, of course, since Austria has joined the European Union, since our foreign policy, of course, has had also to be aligned with the European Union and other structures, but still, where's the room for maneuver for Austria in this context? Where can we still build on Bruno Kreisky's, but of course also other active foreign ministers and Austrian governments? However, to build on what Kreisky would have probably said, mediation dialogue is the utmost and preeminent necessity we have. So in this spirit, we have also collected the panel of today, looking forward to the situation, to the appalling situation in Gaza, in terms of rebuilding Gaza, reconstructing Gaza, but of course not only Gaza, also the West Bank. We have been focusing also on the question of how can Austria, how can we all sort of contribute also to a narrative that does not dilute from the regular sayings we hear, oh, the international, the rule-based order is at its end. No, the rule-based order is not finished as long as we have states, citizens, institutions, they are fighting for it. Just because some people violate the rule-based order does not mean that this is the end of it. So in order to strengthen this, and of course also to strengthen the cause of dialogue, we have assembled this panel today. Because we have a very dear and high-ranking participant, Mohammad Anwar Sadat, I'm also delighted then to, after Vice Chancellor's speech, to ask the Deputy Ambassador of Egypt to say a few words. The ambassador, unfortunately, for urgent family reasons, could not attend. Also, likewise, I'd like to ask afterwards the ambassador of Palestine to Austria to also say a few words, also in the light of our guest, Professor Abusada here from Gaza. Then we start with the panel, which is a very senior one, and since there will be so many sort of topics to be covered, we said we skip the questions and answer sessions, but in the spirit of dialogue, we afterwards will offer you something to drink and some finger food, and we hope that you continue the dialogue of in this spirit among ourselves. So this was my small introduction. I have now the honor and pleasure to announce the Vice Chancellor, and please, Andi Babla, we listen to your speech. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, panelists, former social democratic ministers, it's a great pleasure and a true honor to open today's event, Bruno Kreisky and the Middle East, here at the glorious Bruno Kreisky Forum. Today is a very special day. As all of you know, we're celebrating the 115th birthday of Bruno Kreisky. And when we remember Bruno Kreisky, we pay tribute to a statesman who shaped Austria more profoundly than almost any other. He stood for democratic values, a social responsibility, and an open-minded view of the world, not out of political calculation, but out of deep personal conviction. Bruno Kreisky was a strong reformer. He wanted to shape society and improve people's life. He put people at the center of politics. He improved living conditions across the country. And to this day, entire generations continue to benefit from the milestones he set in social and educational policy. As Chancellor, Kreisky implemented reforms that moved Austria forward. He worked for full employment. He modernized the education system and he opened the universities. He also played a key role in advancing gender equality. Bruno Kreisky's legacy continues to resonate in the best possible sense. And when we honor Bruno Kreisky, we must also speak about his foreign policy work. He was a passionate and highly respected foreign policy leader who gave Austria a distinct international profile. Bruno Kreisky helped establish Austria as a seat of the United Nations and made Vienna a global center for dialogue, for exchange and peace. His main goal was an active policy of neutrality. Through this, he gave Austrian international importance. In a way, he made Austria appear bigger and more influential on the world stage than its geographical size might suggest. His strong focus on peace and foreign policy matched his international social democratic values. It also reflected his deep interest in minority rights and ethnic groups. For Bruno Kreisky, one principle was always very clear. Politics must never be guided by the law of the strongest. Instead, the rule of law, balance, and diplomacy must prevail. This makes him a role model, especially in a world that had become more unstable. He also cared deeply about economic issues in Europe and in the Middle East. Kreisky was convinced that political solutions cannot succeed without addressing economical realities. In the 1970s, a rare constellation emerged. 3 leading European social democrats held office at the same time in Europe. Willy Brandt in Germany, Olof Palme in Sweden, and Bruno Kreisky in Austria. They worked closely together to shape politics based on social democratic values far beyond their national borders. Kreisky's foreign policy was grounded in the belief that conflicts can be resolved through negotiation and a willingness to compromise. He was firmly convinced that violence and terrorism are not acceptable ways to solve conflicts. And this fundamental attitude was already evident in his approach to the South Tyrol conflict in our country. Kreisky himself drew parallels between the South Tyrol question and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In his memoirs, he wrote that the displacement of people from their homes deeply affected him. This was because he himself had been forced to flee in 1938. For this reason, Kreisky paid close attention to developments in the Middle East as chancellor. He focused especially on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And during the 70s, he traveled to the Middle East on 3 occasions, visiting Israel twice. Bruno Kreisky strongly supported the creation of a Palestinian state and was fully aware of the political and economical challenges involved. Kreisky argued that every peace process must begin with the creation of conditions for dialogue, what he described as talks between enemies. In his thinking, the security and right to exist of the State of Israel and the legitimate concerns of the Palestinians were inseparable. And his goal was a peaceful relationship between the Arab world and Israel. He believed this was only possible through the principle of nonviolence, dialogue, and compromise. Peace and security cannot be based on violence or terror. They can only be built on mutual recognition and coexistence. The insight remains as valid today as it was in Bruno Kreisky's time. A just, peaceful, and lasting solution is needed. It must include secure and recognized borders. In the spirit of Bruno Kreisky, the Social Democratic Party of Austria clearly supports the 2-state solution. It is the only realistic path to lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. 2 sovereign, democratic, and multi-ethnic states should live side by side. They should do so in peace and security, within safe and recognized borders. As chairman of the SPÖ, I support the recognition of the State of Palestine under international law. This recognition is linked to the disarmament and loss of power of Hamas and its allied groups. Recognizing Palestine is not only a symbolic act. It is a concrete step toward turning the 2-state solution really into reality. It helps stabilize the region, it strengthens international law, and it supports those who believe in diplomacy, democracy, and the rule of law. And ladies and gentlemen, Bruno Kreisky was an outstanding figure. politically, also and personally. He was a bridge builder and a peacemaker. And in many countries, especially in the Arab world, Austria's positive reputation is still linked to Kreisky's work. His democratic compass, his global perspective, and his courage to pursue even unpopular ideas remain exceptional and continue to inspire us today. Before I finish, let me apologize because I'm not able to stay the whole event this evening here in the Bruno Kreisky Forum. But I'm delighted to be here now within the first minutes of this very important event. And I wish you an engaging event, thoughtful discussions, and inspiring exchanges. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Vice Chancellor Babler, dear Sabine, Secretary General of the Forum, distinguished ambassadors, ministers, thank you very much for the honor to be able to address you, and I promise I'm not going to be long. Of course, you would want to listen to our distinguished panelists rather than hear me blabber on, but except to say a couple of things on behalf of the Egyptian Embassy. We're very happy to have such a distinguished representation on this important panel, on this important occasion, 115th birthday of a great man. We think that the most important aspect to consider when looking back at the legacy of a great man like Kreisky or a great man like President Anwar al-Sadat is not to make this an academic exercise. Looking back should be not to recall things simply, but to draw lessons and to draw inspiration from these legendary visionaries and try to use that inspiration to look forward into the future and to chart a path into going where they had envisioned us to go. In the case of Bruno Kreisky, I think in the case of President al-Sadat, of course, what comes to mind immediately is vision, daring leadership, and courage. To chart a path that may be unpopular at the time, but decades later proves to be the right thing to have been done. And of course, in the case of Kreisky, is being a European politician, like has been said, being able to look deep into the root causes of certain conflicts that he's interested in and have the courage to express certain elements that need to be considered for such a conflict to be addressed. And in this case, of course, that the Palestinian question is not merely a humanitarian issue. Of course, we see how the humanitarian situation right now in Gaza is after this, the aggression of the last 2 years and the amount of unprecedented destruction that happened. But in its core, the Palestinian cause remains a political one about self-determination, one about the Palestinian people's rights to establish their own independent state on their land. And we continue to work as Egypt tirelessly towards that end with our Palestinian brothers and with our European partners and with, of course, our partners in the US. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very stimulating discussion and a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Vice Chancellor Andreas Babler, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends. 115 years since the birthday of Bruno Kreisky. If you ask in Palestine, Austria, they relate immediately to Bruno Kreisky. Not to Mozart, not to Viennese waltz, but to Bruno Kreisky. Und warum? Not because, as many argue, Bruno Kreisky was pro-Palestinian. No. Bruno Kreisky was pro-international law. Bruno Kreisky was a statesman who had two main characteristics. One is his long vision at a very, very early stage, and I'm speaking about the beginning of the 70s, he started to open dialogue with the PLO, with Yasser Arafat, when the PLO was considered a terrorist organization in Europe. And he opened the doors of Europe with Olof Palme and Willy Brandt, because he knew the ultimate security of the state of Israel lies in the establishment of an independent Palestinian state next to Israel. That was the vision of Bruno Kreisky, according to international law. The second characteristic of Bruno Kreisky was his courage. He was never intimidated. I remember in 1979, when Yasser Arafat came for the first time to Vienna, and he was received by Bruno Kreisky at the airport, Schwechat. The then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin said Bruno Kreisky is a Jewish traitor. That was the words of the Israeli Prime Minister then. But Bruno Kreisky was not intimidated. He was courageous. And he insisted that international law says that the Palestinian people have the right of self-determination like any other people on the face of this earth. Today, we are at a crossroad globally. Today, international law, international human rights law is at risk to be dismantled. And it is our choice either to challenge this or to accept a world that is based on power and not based on rights. This is today the real challenge. In this world, in this global world, nothing is separated from anything. Palestine is related to Syria and Lebanon and Europe. And by the way, the last 20 or 30 years, two issues kept Europe busy, originated in the Middle East: the threat of terror and the threat of migration. And that's why when we say we need Europe to act not as a payer, but as a player, because we know that this is a vested interest of Europe to act actively in the Middle East so that finally Palestine would be free, would be a state among other states of the region. And that's why we urge the Austrian government to recognize the state of Palestine, because this is based on international law. We urge them. It is not a symbolic act. We know that Israel is creating facts on the ground, irreversible facts on the ground, that would make the creation of a Palestinian state impossible. And that's why we need to create facts on the arena of international law. So today it is make it or break it. And if it burns in the Middle East, it will burn in European capitals. So it is our responsibility, it's our joint responsibility to finally put an end to this conflict. Thank you very much.
Vice Chancellor, thank you very much, ambassadors. So let me take over and let's dive into the panel, which we will divide in two parts. We will first talk about the past and look back at how Kreisky shaped Middle East politics and what his stance was, and then look at the future and the present, because right today we are all puzzled about what Mr. Trump just presented in Davos as his peace plan and peace council. So we will talk about the future, but very much about the present too. Let me introduce our very distinguished panel. And let me start with our guests from abroad. We are very happy to have the leader of the Reform and Development Party in Egypt with us. He's founding member of the Arab Council of Arab Integration. He's also member of the Council of Human Rights in Egypt, and he's the nephew of Kreisky's friend, former Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Welcome to Vienna, Mohammad, Anwar, Esmat, Sadat. Thank you very much for being here. To my right, please let me introduce you the Associate Professor for Political Science of the Al-Azhar University in Gaza. He holds a PhD from the US, where he studied, is now living in Egypt, and he's an expert on Palestinian politics, but also on Palestinian youth, on peace education. Welcome to Vienna, Mkhaimar Abusada. Thanks for being here, Professor. Our next panelist is here in multiple roles. He's ambassador, former political advisor to Bruno Kreisky, so you have a direct view. You can tell us what went on in his head when he did what he did in Middle East, because you were his political advisor. He's president of the Austrian Institute for International Politics, president of the Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation, also a board member here at the Bruno Kreisky Forum, and he was also the High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1999 to 2002 and led the peace talks there. So you have a unique perspective on how to lead peace talks and what we can learn from that. Welcome, Wolfgang Petritsch. And finally, we have with us the director of the Austrian Center for Peace and the expert on Bruno Kreisky's relations to the Middle East and his foreign policies, because you're writing exactly about the topic we're talking about today. Welcome, Tobias Lang. So we will dedicate an hour on the podium, and then, as Sabine said, we will have the talks with the drinks, because if not, it will be too long for you. So let's dive right in. I would like to start with you, Mr. Sadat. You've been in Vienna now for 2 days. You have had a look at the archives and also learned about the relationship between Bruno Kreisky and your uncle Sadat, who, as we know, in 1979 was the broker of the peace accord between Israel and Egypt, and was murdered in 1981, shortly after that. What can you say after these days in Vienna about this relationship, looking back between Kreisky and Sadat, and what was the role that Kreisky played?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening for everyone. I'm glad, of course, to be here, part of celebrating 115 years of a great man, Chancellor Kreisky. And let me tell you, of course, seeing the archive was quite interesting, because it's history, and there has been a lot of those reports, newspaper, a lot of documents, which was actually very interesting to see. And actually we will try to have a kind of exchange with a museum we have for President Sadat back in Cairo and in Alexandria, whereby we can exchange this kind of documents. Yeah. And it's very important for the new generations to see this, and those leaders who have had vision, leaders who have courage, leaders who have really worked hard for the best of their people and the region in general. But saying this, what I would like to say is that President Sadat, following the war we have in 1973, he have been thinking of how to end this conflict. And he have been thinking of his, let's say, initiative for peace. And he have been consulting, actually, some of the European leaders whom he feel that there is a kind of a chemistry. Chancellor Bruno Kreisky was among them, and there was others also. Helmut Schmidt in Germany, Kissinger, and Ceausescu of Romania, too, actually. And many others, And this is where he make up his mind that he have to have this peace initiative. And if you follow his speech in the Knesset at that time, it was a roadmap, very clear message to the Israelis about a comprehensive settlement whereby if we succeed to reach a kind of an agreement, I think we can, at that time, live in peace side by side, all of us, including Palestinians, of course. So, well, at that time, of course, Prime Minister Begin was, the Prime Minister, and he was a hardliner, not easy to deal with. But I remember President Sadat used to say that making a deal with the Likud, this is a deal which can be respected and they will be committed. If it's a weak government or maybe they wouldn't respect. So he was very much pushing to make the deal or the agreement while Begin is in office. Now, Chancellor Bruno Kreisky actually have been doing a lot in hosting, mediating delegations from both sides, especially, if I remember well, Azra Weizmann, even Diane too, but Azra Weizmann was more because President Sadat liked very much Azra Weizmann because actually he looks very much like my grandfather, his father. Yes, yani my grandmother, she comes from Sudan, originally from Sudan. That's why you can see the face is a little bit black, but his father looks very much like Azra Weizmann. So anyway, so actually he have been running such side talks together with the King of Morocco, Kissinger, and others. And I think he have been playing a big role trying to somehow bring together, especially with a settlement we have in Sinai called the Amit, whereby Prime Minister Begin was insisting that they should keep. And President Sadat was saying, no, they have to evacuate this settlement. So Bruno Kreisky was one of those who convinced Diane and Weizmann that they should somehow clear it and evacuate this settlement. And it happened, actually, in a very peaceful way. So what I'm saying is, those are great leaders whom we are missing them today. With all what is happening surrounding us, I think we are very much in need of those leaders who have the courage, have the vision, which would have helped a lot to avoid what we are all through nowadays, everywhere, not only in the Middle East, but even in Europe. We all have been witnessing what is happening here. So I'm glad to be part of this event, of course. It brings a lot of good memories, and it also shows that, yes, we can. Peace is, I would say, can be achieved if there is good partners, right partners, So that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadat. We will come back to what we can learn from that time for now, but let's first take another look at what went on in Kreisky's head. He was Jewish, he was a Holocaust survivor, he survived in exile. Of course, he had a high interest in the security of Israel. What was his strategy, Mr. Petritsch?
Well, I think Bruno Kreisky's personality, his the fact that he belonged to a minority, a persecuted minority, had to flee Austria, his home country, this sensibilized him for other similar faces. I think this is really what lies behind Bruno Kreisky's engagement in the Middle East. Because the Middle East is a homeland for two peoples, the Jewish people and the Palestinians, the Arab people. And I think the UN plan of partition gave both sides the right to establish a state. unfortunately, the Arab politic at the time was bad. They lost in this military confrontation, and since then, there's only one state, while there still is the notion of a two-state solution around. And of course, we need to keep in mind, when Bruno Kreisky was active, the situation was complex, but it was by far not as complex and difficult as it is today, you know? And this is actually a lesson that we need to learn. The longer a conflict goes on, the more intractable it becomes, and the solution simply is not just around the corner. And this is the situation today. And Bruno Kreisky was concerned about this at the time. And when you read about, or when you read his speeches or his interviews, what he was saying at the time, it sounds almost as if he's here today and commenting on the situation right now. Now, in Anwar, Sadat, Bruno Kreisky sort of found a person, a vis-a-vis, and Bruno Kreisky has known over the years, he was a foreign minister, very much engaged also internationally at the United Nations for South Tyrol and all this stuff. And he knew Assad, he knew Gaddafi, and he knew Arafat, yeah, through contacts also via Sadat. But all these names and politicians were not really as impressive for Bruno Kreisky as Mr. Sadat, Anwar Sadat was.
Was that a personal thing?
Yes, I think there was a meeting of minds. There was also a certain, how should I say, classic elegance to the personalities. The two really had a similar feeling for aesthetics also. I mean, it sounds not very political, but it is important.
Yeah, but then it comes down to people at the end,
And
right?
because in the end, it's about human beings when you talk about politics, you know, whether this is at a communal level, local level, or at the so-called, I don't know, high-stakes politics at the international level. Personalities count, yeah? And today, when we're talking about these two great personalities, it needs to be mentioned, you know, and it needs to be emphasized. And of course, we know other personalities just these days, you know. So you always have this kind of a mix, yeah. And also there's another thing which I believe is extremely important. Of course, politics is always kind of, well, they're all lying, you know. Now we have reached this stage, yeah. And for Bruno Kreisky and also Anwar Sadat, it was clear to speak the truth to the public, you know? And this is also very much about being authentic, yeah? You can always cajole around and say this or that and maybe emphasize this or another thing, but in the end, the vision counts, yeah? And of course, there's also a difference between Bruno Kreisky and Mr. Sadat when it comes to the vision for the Middle East. While Sadat clearly as president of Egypt, he was concerned about his national interest. And this is regaining the Egyptian territory, yeah? The Palestinian issue, he knew, intellectually he knew without resolving the Palestinian issue, there's not going to be peace in the region. For Bruno Kreisky, on the other hand, it was clear beyond any doubt. At the center stage of a solution for the Middle East is the unresolved Palestinian issue. Yeah? And now, of course, looking back to, let's say, this terrible the terrible massacre in October of 23. What lies behind? Now, to just draw this line into our present time. The Abraham Accords, which in itself is quite an achievement, has left out the Palestinian issue. That has driven, without any justification I would make in this case, that has driven a part of the Palestinians into the extremes. Yeah? And to come back to Sadat and Bruno Kreisky, I think Bruno Kreisky also very much admired the courage. And there was one person, a very close friend and Austrian, who actually mediated and who was very important as a go-between, and this was Karl Kahane. Yeah? And Karl Kahane knew Sadat very well. Yeah? And Karl Kahane, being a Jew, very much an assimilated Jew like Bruno Kreisky, he was concerned about Israel, of course. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Sadat, you mentioned Esa Weizmann. Karl Kahane was the go-between with Dayan, and particularly Esa Weizmann, and Sadat, and Bruno Kreisky. This was, in a way, the triangle where this played a very important role.
Let me come back to you, Mr. Petritsch, okay, when we talk about, because I would like to ask you, Mr. Lang, because you know a lot about Kreisky's foreign policy then. And of course, there's a bit of an iconization of Bruno Kreisky. So everybody in Austria takes of Kreisky what they seem fit for their own narrative. And the same goes for his foreign policy. So as somebody who's really studying this, how big was his role really, and what can we learn from him?
Well, of course, there's in Austria the tendency to mystify Kreisky's Middle East policy.
And perhaps I shouldn't even say this on his birthday.
Yeah, but it's true, especially regarding the Palestinian track. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, and Mr. Sadat mentioned it before, we also tend, especially in Austria, to forget about his achievements regarding what became the Israeli-Egyptian peace accords. And I would argue that the road which led to Camp David was also an Austrian road, partly. Because Sadat and Kreisky first met in 1974, when Kreisky was heading the fact-finding mission of the Socialist International, which was put in place after the October War in 1973. And Kreisky meets Sadat, and he comes back and he's totally enthusiastic. He sees Sadat as the man of peace. Kreisky is quickly to propagate a vision of a comprehensive peace for the Middle East with a two-state solution, but with Egypt and Sadat as the key figures, respectively. And he communicates this to the Israeli Labour Party, where this vision is met with skepticism, but also to the US. And but with the US, it was a different situation because they were also opening up towards Egypt with Kissinger and Nixon. And the meeting took place with Sadat in March. And later on this year, in June, Nixon meets Sadat in Cairo, but he does a stopover in Salzburg, just to counsel with Kreisky about the Middle East. It was mostly about the Middle East, and we do have the notes.
But how come he was such a figure that you stop over in Salzburg when you're on your way to peace talks?
Because Kreisky was already known to be a very skilled diplomat, a very skilled statesman. He had good connections with Nixon, especially with Nixon and with Kissinger. With both, he had a special relationship. And so they decided to do the stopover, and I give you just a brief citation, which also tells us a bit about Kreisky's view of the world in those times. He says to Nixon, Sadat is a great statesman. All the support the democratic world can give him, it should. He is the best chance in half a century in the Arab world. He's a cultivated Western man, which tells much about Kreisky's view of the world at those times. And after him, I wonder if there be any chance. And Kreisky is fully supporting Sadat, as is doing Kissinger at this time. Kreisky is also hosting the meeting between Ford and Sadat, also in Salzburg, a year later. And then he's hosting two very crucial meetings between Sadat and Shimon Peres in 78. Shimon Peres at this time is not minister anymore. He's leader of the opposition. But those meetings were very important because they increased the domestic pressure on Begin that there is a partner for peace on the Egyptian side. And then, Wolfgang has mentioned it before, and Mr. Sadat as well, there was this Austrian back channel in the month before Camp David. And the back channel was with Karl Kahane, with Esa Weizmann, and with Esa Weizmann's American attorney. And all this ends in Salzburg, in Fuschl, and in July 78, with a preparatory meeting for Camp David with Sadat and Esa Weizmann, and to keep the levels they fly in the Egyptian Minister of Defense as well. And this was the last crucial meeting before the actual Camp David negotiations. So I would argue that Kreisky played a huge role in this dynamic. There's also an alternative reading to the Austrian role, that Kreisky in Austria is always seen as the advocate for the Palestinian demands and for the Palestinians. Well, there are also voices who saw it quite differently in those times, demands leading to Camp David. For example, the then Egyptian foreign minister, he describes the Austrian involvement more as being one of moderation, but who made Sadat too moderate in the negotiations with the Israelis, meaning that Sadat was actually willing to leave the negotiations about the Palestinians to a later stage and sign a peace agreement only on the Egyptian track.
So this view of Kreisky being totally pro-Palestinian, which some people have, is not historically accurate. Of course, he had a high interest in.
I'm not saying it's not accurate, but I'm saying that there are different views, and there were in those days. And Kreisky had an interest of the Israeli-Egyptian peace accord.
Professor Abusada, if we try to come into the present, but let me first ask you your view from now. If you hear all this, what can we learn from those times, or are times now just so much more complicated that we can't really learn from it?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for coming. And it's my pleasure and my honor to be in this distinguished panel with all of you. Hearing what have been said about the personality of Chancellor Bruno Kreisky, I have to say, and in addition to my readings about him, I have to say that I'm very much impressed by his personality and by two things, by his courage and his neutrality, which we really need in those difficult times among the Palestinians. I have to say that it's the kind of leadership that we really miss in those difficult times, that we really need someone like Kreisky who can mediate between the Palestinians and Israelis. Looking at his background as one of the first European leaders to invite the chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, in 1979 to Vienna, and to basically to be one of the strong advocates of Palestinian self-determination and Palestinian statehood. It's something hits me as a Palestinian and from Gaza also, that it's the kind of personality that someone who survived the Holocaust, someone who survived persecution during World War II, that he very much was against occupation, was very much against settlement expansion by the Israeli government against the Palestinians. It seems to me that personalities like Kreisky doesn't happen very often. Yes, over the past 30 years, when the Oslo peace agreement was signed between the Palestinians and Israelis in 1993, we did have courageous leaders on the Israeli side and also on the Palestinian side. It was the late Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, and also the late chairman of the Palestinians, Yasser Arafat, who signed the Oslo peace agreement in September of 1993. That, in my opinion, very much builds on the legacy of Bruno Kreisky. And I remember what Rabin said back then, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And that still hits me up until this day, that this is the kind of leadership we really need. A leadership that is characterized with courage and in neutrality. And I have to say something funny here. While I came, here to Austria, this is my second visit here to Vienna, and my flight made a connection in Zurich, in Switzerland, and one of the ads in the Zurich airport says, long-term thinking is in our genes. And when I'm thinking about Bruno Kreisky, this is the kind of personality that he has long-term thinking about how to solve international crises and international conflicts. I have to say that just in a very short way, I think the leaders of the early 1990s on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, who were dedicated to peace and solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict on the basis of international law and international conventions, were promising. I have to say, in my opinion, that the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Rabin in November of 1995 very much, let's say that did not put an end. I'm very much optimistic and hope that one day there will be peace between the Palestinians and Israelis with the courage of European leaders like Kreisky. But I think that the assassination of Rabin back then unfortunately suspended the peace process for some time and opened the door for extremists on both sides, on the Palestinian side and Israeli side, to sabotage peace between the Palestinians and Israelis. And I think my last thing here, had we have leaders like Kreisky in Europe or in the international community, we probably could have saved thousands of lives who we have unfortunately lost among Israelis and Palestinians over the past 25 years since the eruption of the Palestinian Second Intifada. It seems, I'm very much confident and sure that we very much miss his spirit, miss his personality and his courage during those difficult times in our region.
We'll dive right into what to do now in a second, but let's first, you brought a book, Mr. Petritsch, about Sadat, and we have the author in the audience. Can you say a word about this?
Yes. This is a book about Anwar Sadat, which came out in Milborn here in Vienna, in German, with the last photos and the very last interviews made by the interviews by a then very young Dutch journalist who was quite close to Bruno Kreisky. He was a correspondent at a time in Bonn, covering also Austria and so on. And he he actually interviewed Sadat, and he traveled with him. And I invited him to come to Vienna, and Mark Bless, this is the author,
Just give us a sentence, Mark, a short one.
Nicht lang. And I invited him to come here. So he will, in a few minutes, tell you the whole story about this book and his meetings with Sadat and travels.
Thank you, Wolfgang, to give me the occasion to say a few words about Kreisky's solidarity and support of this book, our book, but actually you will see it's his book. First of all, I want to say that I was honored this morning, Mr. Sadat, to shake your hand, and got a bit sentimental. We spent 6 weeks with your uncle, unforgettable weeks all over the world. Second thing I want to say is that this is a picture book, so my texts are supporting the photography, not the other way around. So I'm a humble contributor to this book. Now the context. We live in 1981. I'm a 28-year-old correspondent in Bonn for Dutch television and radio and a newspaper. And the editor-in-chief of the newspaper could not understand what Mr. Kreisky was doing. Why would he hug Mr. Arafat? Why would he kiss Colonel Gaddafi? And being a Jew, on top of that. You must go and interview him. Okay, I tried. Unfortunately, around the same time, a Dutch journalist had written a very ugly book about Mr. Kreisky, so I think he decided enough with Dutch journalists, so I had no chance, except that I was lucky to live next door to Konrad Müller, the one who made the pictures, and who was famous because he made portraits of the German chancellors, and he was working on a book on Kreisky, and Kreisky loved him, I think. His middle name is R for Rufus, so I think Mr. Kreisky called him Rufus as a kind of, as a kind of a son. And so Konrad said, "Come with me, we'll try to get an interview anyway." So we went to Vienna. Wolfgang, then important assistant to Chancellor Kreisky, said, "Well, you better go home, it's not going to work." But somehow, after lunch, the Chancellor decided, "No, you can't get an interview, but you can come with me on my trips to the Middle East, so you can see how I do it." Wow, that was interesting. So I called my editor-in-chief, and he said, "You're a correspondent in Bonn, not in the Middle East, so if you go, we can't pay you." Okay, I thought it was interesting enough to go, so 2 weeks later, we arrived in Vienna, Konrad and I, and boarded a private jet. And on the ladder was the pilot with a face mask, and when he took it off, it was Niki Lauda, who I think was already preparing to set up Lauda Air. And Mr. Kreisky liked young entrepreneurs, and so he decided not to take Austrian or some other plane. I don't think the Austrians have a plane, by the way, but anyway, this was the plane. And on board, no surprise, Karl Kahane. Okay. And we flew to Tunis, to Tripoli, to see King Fahd in Jeddah. And the last was a lunch with President Sadat in Alexandria. Somehow along the lunch, Mr. Kreisky said, "Hey, Anwar, you must stop listening to those American journalists, and you get media training from Barbara Walters. Why don't you just listen and give an interview to these Dutch and German Europeans? That's good." He said, "Well," he said nothing actually. So we went back home. 2 weeks later, the Egyptian ambassador calls and said, "The Rais is waiting for you in 10 days in Alexandria." Incredible. It's a boy's story, I tell you. So then we went back to Vienna, and indeed we were flown to Alexandria, and on board again Mr. Kahane and his assistant. And he had thought, well, how can these two boys survive in Egypt without money? Because we were poor journalists. And so the assistant of Mr. Kahane came up with a little suitcase with $10,000 in small coupures, and so we walked into Alexandria with a little.
Oh my God, that never happened to me as a journalist.
wait, it's getting much better. Anyway, to make a long story short, we were taken to Mit Abul Kum, the birthplace of Mr. Sadat, where he was talking very humbly with the people of his village. Then we spent Ramadan in the Sinai desert, and under the Catherine Monastery, walking every day. He was a big walker in shorts, and Konrad making pictures. I'm trying to talk to him. It's 42 degrees, but it's Ramadan, so I'm not allowed to drink, but I'm not used to it. Anyway, he didn't faint. I almost fainted. And then one surprise after the other. He had to visit Mrs. Thatcher in England, so we went to England. Then we had to visit Mr. Reagan in America, and we went to Washington. And while he was talking to Mr. Reagan, we played soccer with George Bush in Blair House. And then the story was written, the pictures were chosen, and we sent the whole stuff to Cairo for His Excellency to look at it and to maybe say, no, this is not right. And then he had no time, because on October 6th he was shot. And it was a personal disaster, because not only was he shot, but 9 other men around him, which we got to know in those 6 weeks, were also shot. So not only did he arrange for me to become overnight specialist in Middle Eastern politics, but also he made sure the money was given. By the way, we gave it back. But he also found a publisher, Mr. Molden. So the book was published in English and in German and sold, I think, more than 100,000 all over the world. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Bundeskanzler.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for telling the stories that made it very approachable how this worked back then. Thank you very much. Let's take the second half of our panel to look into the present and the future. So what do we do now? What should happen now? Mr. Petritsch, you have been, you have said times are much more complicated now than they were in Kreisky's time. So, of course, after the brutal attacks by Hamas, after the destruction in Gaza, we're in a situation where it's really hard to imagine how peace talks can take place. But you have been High Representative in the Balkans, where also massacres took place, where also they had, it was hard to imagine how can these people talk. So from your experience, what should be the next steps? And are we heading in the right direction right now?
Well, let me say, I was really reading with great interest the proposed so-called peace plans coming from Washington, the 20-point plan, already before this turning Gaza into a Riviera and all this kind of nonsense. But the 20 points, of course, this is clearly not a plan. What it is, it's a, how should I say, a punctuation. You have basically 20 points you can talk about, rather vague, not very precise. And that actually is one of the differences what Americans 30 years ago have achieved in Dayton when it came to stop the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The Dayton Peace Accords, a real plan how to turn a war-torn country into reconstructed and turn it into a peaceful country again. For professional diplomats, of course, it is quite a learning experience, and it's almost a sort of an incredulity when you see what nowadays is being called a plan. Yeah? And it starts out with a very decisive point. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, when the peace accord was signed and the war stopped, some of the biggest problems actually started only after the signing, yeah? In spite of the fact that there were already the international forces there, the United Nations, yeah? That is in a stark contrast to the situation now in Gaza, where you do not have the so-called stabilization force, which is one of the 20 points there. Mm-hmm. Only now, many weeks later, they're talking about. And the first principle in the post-war situation is actually the immediate creation of a safe and secure environment. Mm-hmm. Of course, for the population, but also in particular for those internationals who are going to move in to provide the necessary reconstruction, both for the institutions as well as for the physical reconstruction. So one of the major flaws already is here, and of course you can see Gaza today is divided. The so-called yellow line is basically a 50-50 division between the eastern part along the eastern border taken by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and the rest to the west still commanded by the Hamas. Yeah?
Can I ask you just one little question about Hamas? How can you even have talks with an organization that wants the destruction of the other part of Israel?
Right.
Until now, so there has been no step
That's
there.
a very important question, and I think it's important to realize you have to talk with the devil if you want to achieve peace. Yeah? We know this. We were talking to Milosevic, or we were talking to Karadzic, we were talking to all the war criminals, so to speak, around just to stop the war. So that is something which, of course, Mr. Netanyahu didn't want to do. He wanted to totally destroy Hamas, which after more than 2 years of war has not happened. And you could have told him so already at the very beginning. We had a similar situation in way not as heavy as with Hamas. That was in Kosovo with the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, a terrorist organization, which we, upon my proposal to the European Union, I said, we need to take the extremists into the fold. Yeah. Why did I say so? This is what I learned from Bruno Kreisky. This was exactly what Bruno Kreisky told Mr. Arafat. Yeah? If you have to stop the terrorist acts and become political, then, only then, I can support you. Yeah? And these are some of the basic rules that you have. You need to deal with the extremists to bring them in, and then clearly we have now, even 30 years after the end of the war, there's still war crimes tribunals going on, you know? So actually the impunity goes on for quite some time, but in the end, of course, you also need to address the rule of law and what has been done in terms of war crimes and so on, you know. So Mr. Mladic, Mr. Karadzic, they, many years after they had committed the war crimes, they were finally taken to prison, yeah. So these kind of differences, this kind of pragmatic, almost amoral approach to deal with those who command on the one hand, but never let them off. They know and should know eventually law will meet up with them. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So these are some of the issues that you need to kind of know. And this is definitely not the case now. You know, you have real estate, whatever, you know, amateurs diplomatic amateurs who talk here and there, who do this and that. A lot of things have been destroyed in this way. And then you have pros like Mr. Putin or also Hamas with their killing machine. And here you see, you need, in order to achieve, you really need expertise, yeah? And that is sorely lacking. When I look at the so-called Board of Peace, yeah, which was also something created in Dayton for Bosnia. It was called the Peace Implementation Council. But at the Peace Implementation Council in Bosnia, there were the foreign ministers, and not heads of states or so. Heads of state, they signed the Dayton Accord in Paris. This was it. But then you have to move on to the expert level, to the political expert level and to the diplomatic expert level.
And that's lacking now, it's not happening.
This is absolutely lacking, yeah? So what you have now in Gaza is a fact that this Gaza is now divided. And I don't know how you will reunite this Gaza with this kind of approach that the 20-point plan suggests.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on this? So Hamas did not disappear, so that did not happen in the last 2 years. Hamas did also not say they step back from wanting to destroy Israel. What possibility to talk with them is there even?
Thank you, Corinna. I know it's a very difficult question, and I don't even know whether there is an answer to that question or not. But let me say this before I try to answer the questions. We, the Palestinians, have endured this conflict for almost the past 80 years. It's been almost 80 years of conflict, bloodshed, and killing. And yes, the last 2 years have been very devastating, very catastrophic in terms of the number of lives that the Palestinians have lost, and also in terms of the destruction and the devastation that has been inflicted on Gaza, which summarize it with almost 60 million tons of rubble that in Gaza that need to be removed now. But we, the Palestinians, let me say that we don't really have the luxury to lose hope. And if there is a will, there is a way. Yes, we're not very optimistic about the so-called the current setting which were set up by President Donald Trump. But at least we have what we call it a Palestinian Technocratic Committee, or the naming of it is the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which is made at least of now 12 Palestinian technocrats, Palestinian professionals, who are very much supported by the Palestinian presidency, by the mediators, Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar, supported even by the US presidency and by the Arab League. They have to start working on to basically start from scratch. Yes, it's a very vague situation. It's a very problematic situation. But I think at the end of the day, we might reach there. I mean, I'm not really sure whether this is going to succeed or not. But as I mentioned, we have to try and we have to keep hoping. But I think with regard to the most contentious issue here, the issue of disarmament of Hamas, I think there is something that can be dealt with that. Yes, Hamas has been giving conflicting statements lately about disarmament, whether they are going to disarm or not. They have said repeatedly on public that they are not going to disarm themselves, and the only way that they are going to disarm themselves if there is going to be a Palestinian independent state. Now, we know this might happen, and in the long run, as the Trump plan speaks of Palestinian self-determination and statehood, but it's not going to be like around the corner. But in closed rooms, some diplomats say that Hamas is open to the idea of disarmament. And I think they are talking about 3 phases or 3 stages. The first stage is the destruction of the tunnel network in the Gaza Strip and weapons manufacturing. And then the second stage will be the collection of heavy weaponry rockets, anti-tank rockets, which Hamas has no problem with dealing with both first phase and second phase. But then I think the last phase, which is the third phase, which is the collection and destruction of light weapons or personal weapons, where Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that there are roughly 30,000 rifles or light weapons in the hands of Hamas. Hamas says that those weapons do not shoot more than 500 meters, meaning that they are not a threat even to the Israelis or the Israeli communities on the other side of the borders. But it seems to me that there might be a solution to that if the Palestinian Authority is allowed to deploy its policemen in the Gaza Strip. That might be the solution, but I don't think that disarmament will happen where Hamas is going to give up its weapons and arms to Israel or to ISF. I think probably the most successful way to do that is to allow the PA and its policemen and security people to be deployed in the Gaza Strip, where the PA will be able to manage that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
I think there are 2 very specific examples I would like to give from our own experience in the Balkans when it comes to disarmament. There were basically 2 options in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The 3 conflict parties, the armies of the 3 ethnic communities, they were basically confined to the barracks. You know, what the military calls cantonment. Yeah? They had no weapons. They were in there, and so at least they were not active any longer. In the case of Kosovo, we went for disarmament of the Kosovo Liberation Army, but it was for both and you need to think in terms of individuals who are there, young people, yeah? And the greatest mistake that was made in Iraq, already an illegal war anyhow, was the dissolution of the Iraqi army. Yeah? That fed into the terrorists there. This is what we already before, and this is how you do not learn also, an example. In Bosnia and in Kosovo, we managed this kind of transition from the fighting army into or paramilitaries into. But what is important is you need to give the young people a perspective. Mm-hmm. Yeah? In the case of Bosnia, it was there is going to be a united army. And vetting took place, and they were controlled, and then they couldn't. In the case of Kosovo, where no army was seen, they still do not have an army, it was the police. Again, these young kids, young fighters, could, via vetting, get into the Kosovo police force. Yeah?
I'll come back to you
giving
in a second.
the perspective is so important. If Hamas does not have, if the people do not have a perspective, why should they give up weapons?
Mm-hmm. Before I give back to you, I would like to ask you, Mr. Sadat, there's a smell of burning if you smell it, but it's being taken care of. I think it's perhaps the lights. Or even outside. But
it's fireworks.
Yeah, I think you can relax because it's being taken care of by the people here. Mr. Sadat, what can the role of Egypt... Let's just check this and then we go on, because if not, you're not concentrating on us. Okay, it's only a bug. Okay, so let's concentrate for the last, not even 10 minutes that we have. Mr. Sadat, what could be the role of Egypt now?
Role of Egypt?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you're the direct neighbor.
Egypt
so.
Role have always been there, you know, since we have peace with Israel, you know, we have, I would say, established communication channels with the Israelis, and as I always say, yes, we do have peace, which we are both committed, Egypt and Israel, but it was a cold peace, you know, not people to people, mostly government to government, because again, majority of Egyptians, they believe that normalization will come when there is a comprehensive settlement with the Palestinians and other occupied land in Lebanon. So we have established these contacts, and this is what we are also using nowadays, having this kind of delegations from the Palestinians, different, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, Israelis, others, Qatari, and so on. So Egypt is still very much involved because we believe that this is the only way, and we believe that maybe this is a momentum we have to make use of, although I believe we were very late, and honestly, Yani, we are always missing opportunities, chances.
What do you think about the peace plan now, or the peace council that President Trump presented today in Davos? I mean, Egypt is part of it.
You have no other option. There is no other alternative. Nothing on the table.
So you take what's on the table
and try to build on it. Try to get it better. But this is the only way. If we wait, we have seen when we waited since 1947-8, now we end up nothing. And we have, as I said, missed a lot of chances, opportunities. And Palestinians are paying for this. So I believe not only the Palestinian also, but also the Israelis have to understand that enough is enough. They cannot keep on doing what they are doing. It's not about Gaza and Hamas. See what is happening in the West Bank, whereby more settlements you know, too many violence happening there, and this is the West Bank, has nothing to do with Gaza. So they have to realize that if they want a real regional cooperation, if they want to have a real, I would say, security, they cannot do what they are doing. You know, they have to stop it. You know, I mean, after all, it's one God for all of us. You know, so there is no point of keeping on doing what they are doing. What we will see more hate crimes. We will see more violence, not only in the Middle East, but even in Europe, in the States. So, I mean, I don't know how they think. And this peace camp, which was actually happening following President Sadat visit, they were very strong in a time, and they were very much marketing, promoting peace. We have seen how Israelis were very much, you know, pro-peace and supportive for peace. So I think we need, and maybe this is a role where Austria, with the image you have, reputation you have, being a neutral country, I think you could still do something within the EU or even in your own, but I think you will be accepted because Austria considered a neutral country, you know, it's not, it's a neutral, and you have to, I would say, revive this legacy of such a great man, where, why not? I think the chance is there, and it will be welcome from everyone, you know.
Thank you very much. You wanted to chime in right on what Mr. Petritsch said.
Well, I just wanted to add one last thing with regard to the disarmament of Hamas and the Palestinian factions. I think one thing, as Mr. Wolfgang has mentioned and stated, that we basically can make use of two experiences. The experience of the Irish Republican Army, in which it was a lengthy process, but at the end of the day, disarmament happened and peace prevailed. And also another example, which he mentioned, the Bosnia-Herzegovina model. But let me add one more point here. Unfortunately, in Gaza, I think it's much more complicated than that. I have to say that over the past year at least, Israel has created, financed, and gave weapons to 4 Palestinian militias who are operating in the so-called green area, which is under the control of the Israeli army. And by the way, it's more than 53% of the Gaza Strip. Back in October, the Prime Minister of Israel said that Israel still controlled 53%, but over the past 3 months, Israel has even relocated the so-called yellow line, in which they have grabbed more territory from the so-called area under the control of Hamas. Now, those 4 Palestinian militias, which I mentioned, are created, financed by the Israeli army and Israeli security services, have been involved lately in the stealing of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, have been also involved in the assassination or killing of some Hamas operatives, and they have threatened that they are going to sabotage the work of the Palestinian Technical Committee. Some of them issued leaflets and made TV interviews lately that they are this Palestinian Technical Committee does not represent the Palestinians, and they are going to sabotage it. Now, we know, the Palestinians know, that they are basically performing on the orders of the Israeli army and the Israeli security services. They can be shut down if Israel decides to do so. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's going to be a very complicated, lengthy process to reach that goal of so-called disarmament and peace in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you. Let's bring it down to Austrian politics and get back to what can Austrian foreign politics learn from the Kreisky era, or can not learn, because the situation is much more complex. We're part of the EU. The situation on the ground is much more complex. Is there anything, Mr. Lang?
Well, I guess the situation is very much different now. Not because of the EU, but because I think Kreisky was a very singular a singular thing to happen to Austria. He was a skilled diplomat. He has been, when he was promoted to the chancellery, he had already almost 1.5 decades of diplomacy in the highest echelons of international politics. It also was the time of the Temps, where Austria was lucky to be also geographically well situated. So very different environment. But what we can learn is, of course, that Austria can offer its good services, to be a meeting place, to be even bring people together actively, provide the room for dialogue. I think this is what we can learn from the Kreisky time, on an official basis, but also what Kreisky did, like more on a semi-official or unofficial basis. And I think these are what we can take from Kreisky's time. But it's a much different era. If Professor Abusada mentioned leadership back then, and now we have leadership as well. President Trump proved some leadership. That's why we have a truce now.
Different kind of leadership.
Yeah, but it's a different kind of leadership. It's an unstable, superficial leadership, which ends in truce, in a new truce where people are killed every day. So it's much different time we're in.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to conclude by giving the word back to you, Mr. Petritsch. Just give us a short your view and on the Austrian role and what the next steps should be.
Well, if there is an Austrian role at all, I should say, because we have really lost this kind of connection with Bruno Kreisky's active policy, in the Middle East. But, of course, I see in the foreign ministry, now with the new foreign minister, a genuine interest in contributing whatever contributions we can give. And I think there is a potential around. We have a new Middle East special envoy for the foreign ministry, Arad Benke, who is here, an excellent young diplomat. So this is already a very important step. I think what you could do is really in the soft power, mediating, helping, what we are already doing since a couple of years in Jerusalem and the Tempelberg dialogue between Islam and the Jewish religious scholars. I think this is important too, because the issue is that it's a territorial issue. God-given territory for the Islam, for the Muslims, and for the Jews. So an idea is to say, okay, there are 7 million Palestinians, 7 million Jews in this territory. How will you manage to live side by side, together, or whatever? Two-state solution, or maybe a confederation with a power-sharing model, like Bosnia, where it doesn't work well, but it is theoretically possible. So there are options out there. I think we need to think a little bit out of the box. And there, Austria, in my opinion, could contribute, building on the Kreisky legacy, seeing to it. We have quite a lot of experienced people who have worked and learned in the Balkans or in Afghanistan or in other places in post-conflict situations. That is something. But I warn you, doing something, so to speak, Austria alone. I think it needs to be put in the wider context of the European Union. We need to see to it. And I personally am very glad that we have an Austrian who has a crucial role to play, Christian Berger, who is here in the Middle East. I think these are the people who can contribute to what the Austrian spirit, or maybe Bruno Kreisky's spirit, is in all of this. And let me make one last point. I mentioned Christian Berger, but there are two other people where you could almost not imagine that based on the Trump plan, there are people around now being appointed who are excellent. I mentioned Mr. Ali Sharp, yeah, at the technical level, and I mentioned the Bulgarian diplomat, Nikola Mladenov, really excellent people. But unless they have the freedom to really bring their ideas on the ground and to realize them, if there is then somebody up there in Washington vetoing something, this will not work. So we need to see to it that those who really mean serious business should get a chance and an opportunity to do this. And I think this is what the Europeans, what the Austrians could contribute.
Thank you very much. So we're concluding on the minute here. Thank you very much for the time discipline on the podium. Thank you so much, Mr. Sadat and Mr. Abusada, for coming to Vienna and contributing and sharing with us. Thanks to you two for the insights and to you for the really high concentration in the room and your silence. Now it's time to talk with each other. And as Sabine said, the questions directly to the panelists now with a drink. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.